The Milwaukee Bucks' 5-game winning streak has come to an end in Boston. The Bucks lost tonight 119 to 116 to the Celtics. And honestly, the game wasn't even really all that close until the Bucks went on a crazy fourth quarter run to make the score look a little bit more respectable. That fourth quarter run was led by Damian Lillard and Brook Lopez, of all people, who combined for 23 points in the quarter. On today's episode, we're going to take a look at what the Bucks did in the fourth quarter to kind of get back into that game, discuss how the Bucks matched up with the Celtics, and talk about if personal perceptions of this team have changed about their place in the Eastern Conference hierarchy after this loss. So, all of that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. Thank you for coming and hanging out with us today after a tough L for the Bucks. I'm Camille Davis. In addition to this podcast, you can catch me weekly on the Technical Foul podcast, as well as Cheesehead TV's Carry the G and MKE. For a big game like this, we had to bring in the entire crew. So joining me is Justin Garcia from the Bucks Radio Network, and Frank Madden, longtime voice of the pod and the founder of brewhoop.com. Again, definitely appreciate you all tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen or first watch of the day. Now, Frank, I'm going to start with you here. The Bucks got off to another slow start in this game against the Celtics, and in the first half, it honestly seemed like the Celtics couldn't miss as it is. The Bucks face a deficit as large as 21 points throughout this game, and the Bucks finally outscored the Celtics during the quarter in the fourth. But as mentioned before, the comeback efforts fell quite short. So what were some of the biggest changes that you noticed in the fourth quarter to help them get back into the game and make that final score more respectable?
Let me just start with saying it was figured my internet just broke right off the start, which feels like an apt metaphor for the Bucks. Like they just came out and it felt like Boston was, eager to like basically show that they are the best team in basketball. And, Jaylen Brown blowing by Giannis and posterizing Brook on the very first possession of the game felt like kind of a statement. There were two national podcasts complaining about Jaylen Brown this week between Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe. So felt like a statement game from Jaylen Brown. He had 8 assists tonight, guys, like a very un-Jaylen Brown-like game. He was, I feel like the whole Celtics team put together like their season highlight reel of dunks in this game. Like Brook Lopez looked like a stunt man in the Celtics highlight reel tonight. Porzingis got him. Jaylen got him. Jaylen had a half court windmill off a back cut. Sam Hauser had an alley-oop. I mean, like seriously, like they were just clowning the Bucks for periods of this game. And that's why I honestly, Camille, I don't even know what to do with this game given how it ended, right? We've seen the Celtics have these struggles closing teams out. They literally lost their last game blowing a 9-point lead in the final 2 minutes. They did their best to do it again tonight. And I think the obvious things that happened in the fourth quarter were Dame time happened, and it'd be nice if Dame time, could happen before halftime at some point, outside of maybe like the Toronto game. It'd be nice to have like a hotter start, and if the Bucks could make shots, that not just a Dame problem there. But yeah, just a really slow start, kind of just all the stuff that you were not hoping to see from the Bucks in that first quarter in particular. And then in the fourth quarter, I think they were definitely had some more aggression defensively. I mean, Dame mixing it up, getting the steal when he and Porzingis had a mismatch on him. The refs were definitely letting them play. There were definitely calls where it's kind of those things where it's like I thought the Celtics were allowed to do a lot to the Bucks all night. Plays what you can call like Dame had a couple where it's like, he basically, he forced basically fouls on the Celtics, and then the refs just didn't call it. I mean, like Sam Hauser was getting calls, no
He
calls.
was livid.
Yeah, and And you can say, well, he's just like going for the foul. It's like, well, yeah, but I mean, it's a foul. Like if Sam Hauser gets his arm, locked in with Dame and Dame goes up, like, you can say okay, well, that shouldn't be a 3-shot foul if it's, 30 feet from the basket, but I mean, it's a foul. Like, and, we saw a play where it wasn't called and he was really pissed about that. So I think it kind of was like the Bucks were just like, all right, you're just not going to call fouls. Like, okay, we're just going to start playing really physically. And the refs swallowed the whistles on that end a bit. And so I think the whistle kind of went in their way a little bit. And then, Dame, I think just making plays. And yeah, I know Celtics maybe losing a bit of focus that they'd had throughout the game. So I don't know. I mean, is there something you can like bottle there and say like, oh, the Bucks unlocked something there that they didn't earlier? I don't know. I think it was good to see Dame. He's 3 for 10 from 3 tonight. So, okay, again, not getting off the schneid, really still hasn't heated up from 3. But we saw him in that fourth quarter get downhill repeatedly, get to the rim, finish against the Celtics, whether it was Horford, Porzingis, right? He's going to be able to attack those bigs in pick and roll. And unfortunately, I mean, the fact that he rim checked himself on that final attempt that was the kind of quick 2 was just too bad, right? Because he'd been having a really good quarter, and I thought it was important for him probably to someone out of the Bucks big 3 had to eventually wake up and start making some plays. Chris finally hit a couple shots late as well, but yeah, just I thought of in general, obviously I think you're going to look at the box score and say the Bucks best players just weren't good tonight. Brook Lopez finally like broke out, but the Bucks best players were not good. And
Brook Lopez leading scorer for the Bucks this evening.
For the game. For the entire game.
I don't know if that's a good thing, but I don't know, Justin. I'll put it to you. I kind of struggle to. I don't know. I'm not going to call this a moral victory or something like that. I think I was fully expecting like a 10 to 15 point loss tonight going in. So on some level, I appreciate that they just sort of hung in this game and like just didn't let go of the rope entirely, and that they did give themselves a chance late when the Celtics again just sort of, I don't know, just kind of got antsy, nervous, and lost some of their focus. But I don't know what your kind of big takeaways were, if there were clear positives for you, because again, just a weird game that I don't know that we've learned a lot for what this means in the grand scheme of the universe, but there was definitely some eye of the beholder sort of aspects to this one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't and like the other thing for me is and I think all of us agree on this point too, the whole like, well, moral victories here. Like that's what you do for young teams and for teams that are like building towards the playoffs. When you enter the season with a goal of we're going to be a championship team and we want to win another championship, you don't take moral victories like 15 games into a season. So like to that point, I agree. I think to me, what really stood out was like first and foremost, for whatever reason, this team just doesn't play well in the first quarter. We thought that was gone for about a week, and then it reared its ugly head again. And as Adrian Griffin said after the game, essentially, this is not the type of team that you can do it against.
Nope.
You can't ease into games in his exact words, we can't ease into games against the Celtics and teams of that caliber. And that's what we did tonight. And for whatever reason, we've had a tendency of doing. It's not as easy as like, well, look at the first and fourth quarters, but that was a lot of it because the Bucks just dug this hole that you couldn't get out of. Dame was I think 1 of 7 in the first quarter. Giannis was brutal as well, missing a lot of shots at the rim that this team usually makes. And that was another thing when Griff was asked, I think by Eric after the game, about what did you see from Drew Holiday defensively? And his answer was, well, we missed a lot of shots at the rim. It's kind of the chicken and egg thing of like, yeah, but how much of that was, which I think we kind of assumed, the Celtics had Drew Holiday on Giannis as the primary guy, and he was the point of attack. And what that does, like, I'm sure the last 5 years, other teams said, well, we miss shots at the rim that we usually do. Like, well, yeah, that's our defense. And that's what we're trying to get you to do. But it was just such a big hole against a good team that started hot, and that compounded things too, with the Celtics were above 50% from everywhere, basically, for the first 30 minutes of the game. And it changed in the fourth quarter part of that, as Frank mentioned, was the Celtics. This is kind of their finishing move, is we allow you to get back into the game. So to me, it's not so much hey, it's a moral victory, but my takeaway is I expected a loss in this game. Before the game tipped, I was talking about it with Dave Kane, and we both said, "What's your gut feeling?" We were both like, I think we'd probably lose by double digits." That, the Bucks, not a matter of like reading your own press clippings, but things have been going their way. That they'd been like, hey, they turned it around, and that was the narrative around this team. Celtics just lost a terrible game to the Hornets. It just seemed to all add up to, between that and the fact that the Celtics have basically destroyed the Bucks for the last 3 years, and there is no fear from Boston about the Bucks. Just seemed like it was going to be a loss. But to me, as crazy as it is to say, it just kind of proved the point of, this was a trade you needed to make, because there's going to be more of the narrative for the next few days now. Oh, do you think the Bucks would redo that trade if they knew Drew would end up there? And we'll revisit those lazy storylines. But tonight kind of illustrated you had to make that move, because, when you have Dame, and the Celtics are a team that have habitually had issues closing out games. We've seen Damian Lillard close out 3 games already this season, and I know it's regular season, but if you can just find somebody else to hit shots, whether that's Giannis or Brook or who knows, the first 3 quarters of the game, we've seen Damian Lillard saying, "I'll take it the rest of the way." You weren't going to do that with the old setup. That your defense was going to be much better, sure, but you still have to outscore the opponent, and that includes scoring points. And it was something the Bucks just could not do. So I think if both these teams stayed as they were, the Celtics were clearly better. Maybe the Celtics are still better than the Bucks, but you knew it was more of a given if you didn't make this move. So long story short, as crazy as it is to say, tonight gave me more confidence, and not that I needed it, but yeah, the Bucks, this was the right move to make this deal for Damian Lillard.
One note, real quick, Camille, just on the quarter issues. So fourth quarter scoring, Milwaukee Bucks lead the NBA, including tonight, 127 offensive rating in fourth quarters. I'll sign up for that. They're a plus 11 net rating in fourth quarters. Third quarters, 118 offensive rating. Second quarter, 126 offensive rating. Guys, why do we have to play first quarters? Second through fourth quarters. Let's just focus on that. First quarter, 103 offensive rating, -6 net rating. So yeah, it's just been a lack of urgency, and just, yeah, I don't know, right? I think Brook had a good comment after the game. It's like, if I knew the answer, we'd fixed it. It just kind of is what it is. But I don't know. It's definitely not ideal. And as you said, Justin, I think on a night like this, where you've got a crowd ready to go nuts, and a Celtics team that I think was itching to, as you said, if they win in Charlotte by 30, you probably I would have felt better about tonight's game, but they had something to prove. And, again, I think they, at least for 44 minutes, they made a pretty decisive point about where they are relative to the Bucks and the rest of the league. And then again, they let go of the rope a bit. Eventually, ultimately they came away with the win. So,
Right.
Again, I agree. No moral victories. We're too old for that shit. But again, just sort of highlighting some of the good and bad of this Bucks team for sure, in terms of just slow starts, and sometimes you can't finish strong enough when you start that slow.
And like you mentioned, it's not something new with this Bucks team. Like, this has been a theme for this team throughout this season so far. And I don't look at it as a moral victory, but just watching it, I was like, I couldn't believe how many bunnies the Bucks were missing. Shots where I'm like, oh, that's the right play to make. Like, it's Giannis taking on Peyton Pritchard at the rim, but Giannis is going too hard and just bounces off, where I'm like, we don't normally see Giannis shoot this ineffectively so far this season, but against the Celtics, it always seems like it's something where he can't cross that, 50% field goal percentage that Frank has pointed out multiple times. And looking at it, you're like, well, the Celtics don't have some of their, Giannis stoppers on this team now. So what does this look like when they're coming together now? Like, who is going to be that guy? And I felt like Giannis still got a lot of good looks, but he was just missing things that he normally would make. And I want to dive a bit deeper into that as well. In addition to that, just looking at the lineups, because before you even look at just the fact that these are two of the top teams in the East, there was so much narrative around both of these teams, and both of these teams changed their rosters up over the summer. So I definitely want to talk a little bit more about how both of these rosters look when matched up with one another, since these are two teams that most people think will be in the Eastern Conference Finals. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you with 24/7 coverage of the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel. Now, like what I was mentioning, this was our first up close look of the Bucks' new big three going up against these new look Celtics. We had questions about how matchups would look. And these are two teams, like I mentioned, that were seen as like Eastern Conference Finals favorites. Like these are the two teams when you're asking who's coming out the East, these were the teams that were mentioned the most. And I really want to know how you feel about how these two teams match up after seeing it for the first time tonight. Because one thing that stood out to me was watching Tatum and Brown. We knew that the wings in Boston were a problem. And in years past, the narrative has been around this team like, hey, Chris Middleton is a Boston killer on offense, and years in the past on defense as well, where it's like Chris Middleton plays well in Boston. In 22, after the Bucks, won that championship and Chris Middleton was injured, the narrative around it was, if we had Chris, we probably would have won. And that might have been true for that situation. But seeing Chris Middleton's play now, after the injuries, I've mentioned before, it looks like he's losing some lateral quickness. And I'm a big Chris Middleton fan. I'm a big 22 stan. I still believe that he brings enough on the table offensively, although tonight he was cold from the field. But it just looks like he can't keep up, or he couldn't keep up. Let me say it that way. He couldn't keep up with Tatum or Brown tonight. In the fourth quarter, as you mentioned, Frank, he was able to play a little bit more physically. So it stood out where it's like, okay, he's, they're missing a little bit more. Not sure if that was due to Chris or just fatigue by the end of the game at that point, but that stood out to me. And with that being said, I was like, man, the Bucks need some additional wing defenders. This is the game where you really miss Jay Crowder, or at least the version of Jay Crowder that we've seen so far this year. Saw a little Ajax, came in with some energy, saw some Marjan tonight, and both young guys did what they could. Marjan got cooked a few times by Brown, but it seemed like it might have just been one of those nights for Brown. As for Tatum, things were a little bit tougher for him, but knowing he came into the game feeling a little under the weather, that could have had something to do with it. But hey, when you're on the court, what you do is all that matters. There's no excuses at that point. So, Justin, I'm just curious from you, like, what are some things that stood out to you when looking at how this Bucks lineup matches up with that Celtics lineup, especially with you saying like, hey, this just made you feel like this trade should have happened anyways?
Not great, but I didn't have high expectations for that defensively, because we've gone over ad nauseum that like the Bucks are going to have to dominate around the basket with this team, because you're not going to be able to keep up with them on the perimeter. And that was kind of, we saw a little more of it in the second half, but by no means was it like the blueprint. It was kind of like the Bucks, and it's the analogy that we've used for most of these 15 games. When you look at their transition defense, specifically, is like they were kind of caught in the middle of, do we try to keep up with the Celtics on the perimeter with inferior defenders for what they're throwing out there? Or do we just say, okay, well, they're going to feast there. We're just going to destroy Boston around the glass and on rebounding and points in the paint. And that's where we're going to find our advantages. And they just kind of were caught in the middle. At times they would use that size. At times they would get away from it. And I think you either have to just say, we're going to play the young guys. And it hurts not to have Jay Crowder. But against this team specifically, I think we've seen enough of Boston through the years to know what to expect. And we're starting to see enough of this iteration of the Bucks to know what you have, that when you're playing this Celtics team, it's one or the other. Either you're going to say, okay, we'll do what we did for stretches of that playoff series when we didn't have Chris, and say, we're just going to be bigger and more physical than you, and that's how we're playing. Or you play with Giannis at the 5 and you play the young guys, and you need Jay Crowder to help you out there as your small ball 4. But you got to play those young guys more, because those are the only guys that we've seen that can keep up in all of those matchups, not just tonight against the Celtics, but everything on the perimeter that, we've talked about it. You guys have talked about it on other post games. I don't think it's hyperbole 15 games in to say that Andre Jackson Jr., despite the fact that he's young and he's still growing and learning and he's going to get calls to go against him, I think it's pretty clear he is already your best perimeter defender that you have. So with this team, with guys that can score all around the perimeter, I think the Bucks are kind of caught flat-footed in not picking a lane, so to speak, of either be the bigger, more physical team or just say, all right, let's see what the young guys can do. And they didn't do that. They kind of fell in the middle. And I think you saw that for the first quarter and the first 3 quarters, especially.
Yeah, I don't think when you look at the Bucks defensively, I don't think with the starters, I don't think you like any matchup. And I think that really highlights the fact that Brook Lopez and Giannis don't have favorable matchups against the Celtics defensively. Like, who's Giannis supposed to guard? Like, I actually would have liked to see him on Tatum more tonight than we saw. We saw Chris on Tatum a lot. The first half, I thought Chris just, I mean, if that was the only time you'd seen Chris Middleton this year, you would have been like, this dude's cooked. He's done. Like, some of the missed shots on offense were super uncharacteristic. Not what we've seen the rest of this year. He's been super efficient and effective offensively. Defensively, obviously, we know that he's not the guy that he was 5-6 years ago. Again, we'll see if maybe he can get back to where he was a couple years ago. He was always liable to give up blow-bys, even during like the title run. Like, the only time KD got to the rim was when Chris was on him. Sometimes he could just catch Chris flat-footed and blow by him to the rim. We saw that a times today, where either Tatum or Brown was able to just kind of catch him and get to the rim with easy. And those are the ones where you're just like, shit, that ain't good. But Chris is also like pretty savvy, right? And he's not small. So when you put him in these pick and rolls, he navigates screens relatively better than pretty much the rest of the Bucks, even some of the smaller Bucks wings. And he's not a guy that again is like a mouse in the house if you got a switch and a post up against him. Again, he's not some big strong dude. He's not Kawhi Leonard obviously or something, but he has some size and some physicality that he can play with at times. But it was just, I mean, the some of the misses from him. I mean, just some of the body language from him after he missed like a couple like layups, short bankers, and it was just like Chris is just like, WTF, like what is going on?
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of rescued the night a little bit. I mean, the fact that he ended up with 12 points, 7 assists, no turnovers, 5 rebounds, like it was in many ways kind of a save, and probably the best stat for Chris tonight, 29 minutes. The fact that they let him run, we talked about he was at 23 minutes, could have gone up to 25 the other night if they had kept him in the last 2 minutes when they pulled the starters. So again, like hopefully this is a sign that like Chris is going to be able to play this amount of minutes night in and night out when he's rested. But yeah, I mean, I think the first half in particular was, it was just ugly. And I think that kind of highlights again that you don't have good matchups. And I think if you were to put an Andre Jackson into the starting 5, which again, I get why Griff doesn't want to do that right now, because it puts a ton of pressure on, Andre Jackson Jr. to be the answer.
And then what's plan B if it doesn't work?
And then you bench in there. Because we've talked about it, and it was really more, I think we talked more about in the context of Marjon, like preseason, right? Like if you give him the boost and say you're the starter, and then things don't go well, and then it's like, sorry, man, you weren't good enough, or you didn't hack it. Then you always just worry about what that could mean. But yeah, I mean, like again, Malik Beasley has done kind of everything probably you can ask. He's shot the shit out of the ball, like over the course of the season. Only 2 out of 3 tonight. Scored 6 points, but like we've seen oftentimes against the Celtics, like the guys who are supposed to spot up and shoot just don't get many opportunities. Boston can generally cover up pretty well, and they don't, unfortunately, need nearly as much help as you would want to slow down Giannis. Right. And so I think that to me was the biggest problem. I think when we think about Giannis, I mean, I feel like it's a broken record where we talk about him like, oh, he's uncharacteristically missing layups against the Celtics. I mean, he couldn't move Sam Hauser a couple times in the second quarter. Like he got him matched up, and I was like, all right, put him under the rim, do what you were doing the other night in Washington. And, he ends up like having to spin, and he's kind of throwing up like, hook shots on the move. And it's like, okay, well, he's gotten better at that this year, but I'm not shocked that some of these aren't falling. So I thought Boston they did a really good job of dislodging him, and Drew was the tip of the spear. And we talk about them losing Grant Williams, but you just brought in Drew Holiday, and I don't think you just can't have Giannis. I just think it's going to be so hard for Giannis to be initiating offense from 30 feet out when Drew Holiday is the defender, right? I mean, like there's nobody better at kind of managing like anybody coming at you in a pick and roll, whatever it is. So I think in those situations, you just got to put Giannis off the ball more if they're going to put Drew off ball. And again, like, okay, then they can switch, fine, but then let Giannis get a switch and attack whoever, the other man was guarding. So I thought that was, that was frustrating, unfortunate. And I don't know, it just seems like this, Giannis doesn't look like he's expecting to play well when he's in Boston anymore. Like it's just something about it. Especially over the last year, he's just really struggled. He just cannot score efficiently against them. And I think the other issue though, I mean, defensively, like I was saying, like there isn't a natural guy for Giannis to guard. And Tatum's maybe the closest, but Tatum's obviously got, an ability to hit step backs and do stuff on the perimeter, where Giannis, again, that's not really Giannis's game, covering that far out, because he's 7 feet, 250 pounds. Like guys that big don't do that. He's as good as anybody at doing that, but that's just not normal. So, and they don't have a lack of shooters, so he can't just kind of roam and like create chaos off the ball, right? Which
And
to
that he
me is
did.
and to me that's like the thing I worry about, is like suddenly if like you've got this, Ferrari that like, and you're having to, go off road or something like that. It's like, well, how do you use this? Like, how do you put him in a better position to succeed? And unfortunately, if you play like with Giannis at the 5, it's like, well, then you would have taken off your best offensive
This
player,
game,
Brook Lopez, because Brook was great. He had the little, 15
that push
foot
shot.
push shot. It was back, Camille. We were talking about that being the bellwether of, Brook's game in some ways offensively. So yeah, it's absolutely a concern. And at least I was encouraged that Drew sucked offensively at least. So he finally hit a 3 in the fourth quarter, but he didn't do anything offensively. And I think, Justin, to your point, if you had said like, do you want that guy being your second best player, and having that be your like second best player after Giannis offensively, I'd be like, oh shit, like yeah, we would be really screwed if we were going into another year expecting Drew to be the guy that's going to carry the second unit or whatever. So anyway, but yeah, I think the matchups are absolutely something to worry about. And
Yeah.
again, I think Dame can punish their big guys in pick and roll, because obviously Porzingis doesn't want to switch and play super far out and things like that. But I think I definitely feel like it's a bigger concern for the Bucks in terms of matching up right now, because Boston has shown again and again, and they did it again tonight, that they can slow down Giannis. And I think Dame's going to do Dame stuff, but they at least have good options that they can throw at him.
Frank, you mentioned something that stood out to me when talking about their defense and how do you play with this Bucks defense against this Celtics team, and talking about, okay, well, now you're going to have Giannis on the perimeter. And one thing I noticed a lot throughout this game was when the Celtics were getting some open threes, it's like it's a communication breakdown that just happened here, where you're seeing Giannis and Brook having to be on the perimeter, holding guys like Al Horford, or for Giannis at times, Brown, and they're cheating off so far because they're just so used to being in the paint. And they're cheating off, they're helping off, and then they lose track of who they're guarding. And the next thing you know, the Celtics get an open 3. And I definitely want to dive a little bit deeper into that in our last few minutes here that we have, just about perception of this team. Because another thing that I thought coming into the game was that, hey, the Bucks bench play should be something that stands out in this game. We have heard all season about how the Celtics bench isn't their strong suit. They only went 3 deep tonight, but yet and still, those 3 guys outscored the 5 guys that came off of the Bucks bench tonight. So to end the show, I definitely want to dig in just a little bit, really quick, about how this game might have altered how you feel about the Bucks in the Eastern Conference hierarchy. So let's get into that after this quick little break. So, like I mentioned, with this game, it's a measuring stick game. Coming into it, I was like, hey, if the Bucks win, don't be too high. If the Bucks lose, don't be too low. Like, it's a November game at the end of the day, but it's a measuring stick. So it's a game where you kind of like, okay, well, let's see how we're looking at this point. And to me, it looked like the Bucks still have some things they need to work out. And if they can clean that up, I can have a better idea about how much of this is actually like personnel or just the Bucks having these miscommunications and these miscues. So, Justin, I want to throw to you really quick while we have our last 5 minutes or so here. But after this 3-point loss to the Bucks, do you feel any different about where you see the Bucks in the Eastern Conference hierarchy? Like, the Celtics and the Bucks have been talked about as the two top tier teams, and the 76ers have been hooping recently as well, coming back into that conversation. So did this game change any perceptions to you?
No. The result was expected. It didn't change my perception of the two teams. And I think, Frank pointed out too, the whole defensive matchups thing is what you really have to evaluate. I know not having Jay Crowder played a role, but let's be honest, it's not like Jay Crowder is the linchpin of your defense that's going to change everything. So it didn't change anything on that front for me. It felt a lot more like the team we saw the first week of the season than it did the team that we saw last week. And it's still only 15 games into this system with Griff and learning the new teammates and all that. So like that part I get, that you could explain some of what we saw, but it's just but this has kind of been like 3 years with these two teams. What I would point out though is you mentioned kind of like a barometer game here, and I think the favorable part or the good part about the schedule with these 4 matchups with the Celtics is where they come. 15th game here that you played. Your next one is sometime in January. It'll be game number 36.
Yep.
Yeah. The one after that is game number 67. And your final one is game 77, which at that point, maybe neither of these two teams are playing for seeding really. But the first 3 games, like where it comes, they're nice checkpoints to see. We said it's going to take time. So have we seen that growth in each of these matchups? And that to me is the big thing to really focus on in the next 3 with Boston is, have we seen marked improvement from this team? Because enough time will have passed where it's not just, okay, we play them again in a week, and how much better has the team really gotten?
Absolutely. Frank, I'm going to give you like a 2-minute ISO. How are you feeling about where the Bucks stand in the Eastern Conference? Do we have a frozen Frank? Well, I throw it to him. Absolutely, we do. That is perfect timing. But
well, look, let me.
Go ahead.
Just really quickly, I was going to point out when we talked about defense, I did think it got better throughout the course of the game. It wasn't great, but it got better. And, especially in the first half, everybody for the Celtics scored and hit a 3 except for Jrue Holiday. For the game, every player scored double figures for the Celtics except Jrue Holiday. But what really stood out was what Boston did at the rim and their corner threes, the easiest shots in the league. They were just feasting the Bucks on those. They were 5 of 5 on corner threes in the first half. They didn't get any in the second half. It's not as if the Bucks just put the clamps down, but they showed some improvement there. They got a little better at the rim. It still wasn't great. That Boston, I think, finished in the 98th percentile for their efficiency at the rim tonight. So you saw subtle growth, but nothing to really write home about and say, all right, I feel great about where things are headed.
Yeah, Frank, the computer freezing took up just about all your time. No, I'm joking.
That was my rim check. That was my rim check. That was my Dame rim check to end.
That was you getting hung by the rim at the end there?
Yeah. I will point out, Justin, 21 of 23 for the Celtics at the rim. Not great. Although they were 1 for 11 on short floaters. So, you kind of like aggregate out the noise a little bit. There's oftentimes a little bit of gray area between how things get classified with one of the
26 of 28 on quarter threes and shots at the rim. It's not great.
I think the challenge for the Bucks is like, honestly, I feel like if you just try to switch more and almost like bait them into just playing one-on-one and you just hope that your small guys can at least keep dudes in front of them and hope that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are going to take, 15-foot turnaround jumpers rather than start working the ball around. Because I think that's when the Celtics offense really becomes dangerous, is when their guys drive and draw help and kick. Because they're not they don't have like a pick and roll point guard. They don't have a Dame Lillard or even a Tyrese Maxey, right? So they don't have kind of that typical like go-to sort of action late in games the way that we might say those teams do. But when again they actually like get into actions where they start to attack a little bit and they can do kind of basic passing, kicking it out, working the ball around the perimeter. Like to me, that's when Boston's at their best. And we saw a lot of that, right? Where the Bucks again got into rotation and it felt like they were sort of chasing shadows. So, you know, they tried trapping a little bit. I think teams now like are ready for Bobby Portis to trap pretty much every time. Like Al Horford was like finding you know, corner threes every time it felt like that Bobby was trapping. So yeah, I mean, I think Bucks have some things to figure out. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think, you know, you're going to need Giannis, Chris, Dame to be not what they were tonight in the first three quarters. And again, yeah, I mean, if Giannis is this, then you're not going to win a playoff series, obviously. You need him at a way higher level, and you need him to be way better than he has been over the past year plus against Boston, right? Even at the end of the series in 2022, when he had that monster series, he wasn't making many, you know, he was struggling to make shots against that Boston defense. And obviously they were loaded up against him. Now they're still figuring out a way to do it, even with different dudes. So a loss is a loss. But as you said, Justin, we're going to get 3 more chances to see how these teams play each other. And honestly, like, I just want to see the next time these come out, Bucks get off to a faster start. And I just think like psychologically, like even though Dame's new, and I mean, Boston's got 2 new starters, 2 new high-end starters that they're working into. So it's not like they're just like the model of stability here and they don't have any changes that they have to figure out, right? We use that as an excuse for the Bucks, but lots of teams have changes, new coaches, whatever, and you know, don't go through all the same stuff. So so yeah, you just hope that they kind of figure it out, because as you're saying, like, psychological edge at this point after the last couple of years, if these teams meet in the playoffs, totally, that's a total Boston edge, I think, at this point. You're gonna have to actually go win some games. You know, like last year the Bucks backed into an OT win against the Celtics, you know, C team or whatever it was, when they rested all those dudes. The 2 games when the real teams played, Bucks got the doors blown off them. And hey, progress tonight, I guess. You had the doors blown off and you kind of put them sort of back on the car by the end a little bit. But still not a great play. Still not a great way to end the night. And I think just a reiteration that yes, a 5-game winning streak does not mean that everything is now perfect and that, hey, you're ready for the playoffs. I think we got a reminder of that tonight.
There's still a lot of work to do. Like we mentioned, there was too many turnovers tonight as well. There were times in the game where the Bucks could have cut that lead down to single digits in the third quarter, and they turned the ball over, and it's just kind of like
Giannis just like chucking the ball out of bounds when he's got like dunks.
It was too many mistakes. The Bucks have some things they need to tighten up, but the good news about that is that we're only 15 games into the season, so they have some time to try and get that together. So we're going to end the show here this week, or this today, on that note. And as a reminder to everybody,
we're ending it today after
today. Right. As a reminder, though, make sure you checked out Locked On Sports today. 24/7 coverage of the top sports stories of the day with local experts from the Locked On Network. So make sure that you go and subscribe on YouTube to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. And on that note, you can catch us again on Friday previewing the next in-season tournament game. But until then, we wish you all well, and we're going to call it one. Happy holidays if you celebrate.
Happy Thanksgiving.